incredible. There's just something about notoriety that just always, I just think is truly, truly incredible. People that were like so adamant in their personal views, so unforgiving and relenting that they will be remembered forever. Think about how dime a dozen the average human being is. There's billions of us. There's like a couple of examples in all of history that would just never be forgotten because their actions were so groundbreaking. I just think it's quite amazing when I think about, you know, like the Hitlers and the Stalins and the Mussolinis and the fucking
The effect that they had on the world.
yeah, exactly.
Aye. If you take morality out of it, just the impact that they had on society is massive. They started world wars, you know.
Yeah, millions died.
Was it
because of these,
was it
effectively
Genghis
just these
Khan
people.
killed like 10% of the population or something like that?
Right, exactly. Yeah,
Oh, fuck it.
it's like yeah, man. We're fucking talking about, you know, like how like it's been centuries, and we still talk about Alexander the Great. We remember him as the Great Man. It's unbelievable. Fucking Caesar. There's another one for you.
Jesus.
Jesus. Took me a second to realize what I thought that you were just like, yeah, Alexander the Great. Jesus Christ.
No. The
yeah,
Jesus
no, man.
Christ.
Yeah, exactly. That is like a extremely influential figure.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. Are we a podcast now, Liz? Are we official?
Have we made it?
Yeah.
40 episodes later. Uh-huh.
Yeah, so I think it was like, it might have been like episode 2 or 3 where we're like, eventually we'll be on Spotify, guys. Eventually we'll be on all of these podcast services. Well, now we are.
Well, we believed it when we said it, you know.
That's
we thought
true.
this would be a simple project. It turns out it was extremely simple. It just took us a very, very long time to get around to it. But that's us. Website, Spotify,
Yep.
YouTube, Apple.
This is
We're
like
official,
one.
man.
This is why I'm late all the time as well. Because see, when I get up for something, I genuinely believe that I'm getting up in time.
Yeah,
Like I wake up and I'm like, I'm gonna be on time to this, and I'm 15 minutes late for everything I do. It's exactly the same philosophy. We're like, yeah, we'll have done this by next week, and then 3 months later, we have uploaded it.
Yeah. Well, we're just keeping the guide legit, man. Just being true to ourselves, you know.
Yeah, I guess so. So I guess if you check out the links in the description this episode for Spotify, for the website, for iTunes, and there's also a link down in the description for the artist that did the art for the profile picture, the banner, and the cover photo for the podcast as well. So check that out if any of you guys are looking to have art commissioned, because Mark was a really good communicator with us as well. He gave us a lot of leeway on like the requests that we had as well. He sent us like trial drawings and was like, "Are you happy with this?" Asked him for changes, he made them straight away, sent them back. So he was like, it was really, really good to work with him.
And we're really, really happy with the result. I think the channel looks pretty slick now.
Yeah, I just need to figure out how to get the banner on in the dimensions, but that's a logistical issue, I guess.
Yeah. We'll update you on episode 20 or something.
maybe 25.
Yeah.
So if you didn't know, this is Guide to the 21st Century, a conversational podcast between two friends, Lewis and I, discussing topical issues and trying to navigate the minefield that is life in the 21st century.
So each week, Scott and I will think of a topic that's been playing in our mind, and then what we do is we bring that to the show. We explain to the other what we've been thinking about, try and disseminate our views a little bit, and really the end goal is to try and reach some sort of conclusion that we maybe wouldn't have been able to reach on our own.
So in the last few years, I guess, Lewis, I've been kind of thinking more about social issues, and that's probably been reflected on Guide, because a lot of the social topics that we have probably been mine. You know, the backlash for LGBTQ people, the trans kids medical treatment, the Black Lives Matter movement. A lot of those topics are mine, and it's
true. Yeah.
I think over the last couple of years, it was maybe the catalyst for this was when there was somebody close to me that came out as gay. There was somebody that was really close to me, and I think that sort of gave me a lot of perspective on these issues, and it gave me like a lot of, I guess, experience seeing someone that was dealing with these issues, and it kind of highlighted how important it was for a society to kind of deal with these things. So these are the issues that I've kind of been thinking a lot about, and like in the last few years that I've kind of been maturing and being a bit like introspective about it. And if anything, to be honest, Guide had probably had the opposite effect that I thought it would when it came to some of the more progressive stances, especially when it came to medicating trans kids, because I definitely came into that topic thinking to myself that this probably wasn't something that we should be doing. But by the end,
I think we both thought it was outrageous, actually.
Exactly. But then we had a conversation about it, and we actually as we went through it and we discussed it, bounced it backwards and forwards, we sort of realised that this might actually be something that people should be considering if they have gone through all of the safety checks.
Sure. Well, yeah, I think we both agree that we'd walked out of that with a completely different appreciation of maybe what it would be like to be the child or the parent in that situation, how it was definitely more nuanced than we had appreciated, right?
Yeah, and it's probably one of the more enlightening episodes for me, and it's definitely these topics are more close to home now for me because, like I say, someone that I know has come out as gay, and it's been
Hmm.
an experience for them, and it's sort of changed me a little bit as well. So today I want to speak about something that perhaps might still seem ridiculous, and it might be easy to brush off at face value, just
Okay.
like the medication was when we first did it. But what I want to talk about today is couples or parents that choose to raise their children as what they are calling babies. Now, and that when I spell babies, it's THEYBIES. So a baby is when a couple or a parent has a child, they choose to raise them sort of gender neutral, so that as the child grows up, it can kind of figure out what's going on. It can figure out its own gender. Um, and I think it's in an effort to sort of stop the gender stereotypes, to stop sort of pigeonholing your children into something. So, for example, if your child's a biological male, people that are claiming that they're raising their child gender neutral are saying, you know, if people know your kid's a male, they'll buy them like blue clothes, they'll buy them sort of boys,
Sure.
typical
Yeah.
boys'
Yeah. Yeah.
toys. So they're trying to avoid that by raising their children gender neutral. And I actually seen a few examples online of people who just weren't telling people what gender their child was. They were raising like a child, and that was it. It was just they didn't announce what the sex of the baby was at birth. They were not telling people. They were just asking them to respect the fact that they were using gender neutral pronouns, which seems, that seems like a really progressive, really radical sort of idea that's going forward. And it's one that I've actually really struggled to find a reasonable amount of information on, because there's not a lot of like research that's been done into this, because it's a
Right.
fairly new phenomenon. We've no idea what sort of impact this will have on the child as you raise it. Um,
Hmm.
so we've kind of spoken at length over the social topics that we've had about LGBTQ plus people, and the difficulty that they face coming to these realizations. So I want to do a similar thing as what we did in topic one of episode one, sorry, and my topic where we spoke about the backlash that they receive when they come out. And I want to take a deep dive into this one because it seems like, from on face value, it seems like liberal people, extremely liberal people with who have their hearts in the right place, are
Hmm.
making changes, fundamental changes to pieces of society without really thinking about the consequences, if that makes sense.
Yeah. 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 This is these actions will have a generational effect. It's because these people will grow up, and I think people often underappreciate the influence that parents have on their children. I think for the most part, it's an extremely important part of their life, and there's a good chance that these people will, maybe based on their experiences with their parents, it'll decide how they raise their kids in future. So yeah, that seems like a completely fundamental point that definitely worth discussing.
Yeah, so I spoke quite a bit in the political compass episode because we spoke about libertarian, authoritarian, and how, authoritarian is kind of seen as the evil side, but we tried to, well, or I tried to sort of explain how it's also necessary because the systems are in place for a reason. All the things that libertarian people want to change. Yes, there are bad things about them, and there are improvements that could be made, but these systems are obviously in place for a reason. And I think
Mm.
libertarian people often don't consider that reason. And I think that might be
I think
something that's happening here.
okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, I'm curious to see what you mean exactly by people. So you think that people that hear about people raising their kids as gender neutral, it's just like immediately scoffed at, and there's not enough thought put into why they're doing it, type of thing,
Well, I mean,
or
that's probably definitely the case, sure. But I was more talking about the people who are choosing to raise their children
mhm,
as gender neutral. They're making this sort of change to the way they raise their child, and
mhm.
I don't see a lot of, like, the interviews that I was reading online. I don't see a lot of them talking about why children are raised in this way in the first place. So that they're talking about taking away gender stereotypes. They're talking about removing like masculine, feminine pigeonholes, if you will. But
Hmm.
I never really see them speaking about why these things might actually be in place or why they could be beneficial. It's
Or
more
why they've
it's more
existed
just
for the
about the
last
progressive
X
nature
years.
of like making a change for like trans people, which I'm all on board for. But I wonder what that's doing to the potential benefits that the system had in the first place.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. 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 Okay. I think I'm on board with you now. Like, yeah, this is like a massive change, and that is what like the liberals tend to do. They look for deficiencies in the system and implement change. But I think we're both in agreement that we need people on the opposite side to temper that and to say, look, we're doing this for this reason. Tell me why you are changing this. It's because
Yeah,
you're right. That's an extremely interesting one. I've never. I thought that I thought that people raising kids gender neutral was like super niche. I thought that is this
I think it is.
okay, okay, okay. So this isn't like it probably is like a trend, but it's certainly not like a large movement. You don't think?
I don't think so, but it's definitely one that's been I've seen more and more often, and I don't mean it's became like this widespread phenomenon. I just mean that,
No.
maybe like once in 2018, I saw an exact like a news story that was like this couple are raising their kid as gender neutral, and then in
Mm.
2019 maybe I've seen it 2 or 3 times, and then in 2020 maybe
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
seen it
yeah.
like a few more times, and these are definitely fringe cases. I'm not saying that there are like massive movements, but I read something online. It was like there's a Facebook group in America that talks about couples that are raising their children gender neutral, and the Facebook group had 220 members on it. So
Hmm.
you can
Hmm.
imagine that there might be about 120 kids or something like that in that sort of bracket of parents that were raising their children like that. So it's by no
Hmm.
means a massive movement that's going on at the moment, but it's just certain parents that are choosing to do it. And I thought it was super interesting.
Hmm. Hmm.
So when I talk about like I say quote unquote gender stereotypes, um, and by that I mean sort of when you think about male and female, I guess you would think about like masculine, feminine traits. You would think about giving like boys blue toys and giving girls like pink toys, and but
Yeah, diggers or Barbie dolls, that type of thing.
exactly. So I wonder why this kind of stereotypical system is in place in the first instance, because obviously there are flaws in that system that we've discussed in the podcast at length. Like, for example, the difficulty that trans people, the difficulty that gay people will like undergo in their life because of these stereotypes that they're put into.
Yeah.
But that must be in place for a reason, because
Right.
we've seen in research that men tend to be more masculine than women. I don't know. Jordan Peterson does a lot of talking about this, and he talks about how they're by and large the same. But if you pick like one example in like an average of people, the man is like 60% more like it's like 60-40 to he will be more masculine or have more masculine traits, and she'll be 60% more likely to have feminine traits. So this
Right.
it must be in place for a reason.
Well, I mean, I think that seems to be a debate in itself, don't you think? The whole idea of there being a male versus a female brain. I just on the last episode, I said to you that I do believe in the whole concept of like a male and female brain, but that was when you mentioned to me about the case of two gay fathers raising a child, and then like one of the fathers, their brain chemistry literally manifested to manifest more feminine traits, the type of traits that you would see that are more maternal and that type of thing. So it's clearly, I don't think this is cut in stone whether how
No,
masculine or feminine men and women even are. But I think we can say definitely when we look at large data sets, right, overall men tend to have certain inclinations as opposed to women, and that's why there are stereotypes. That's why they exist in the first place. It's because they don't pop out of thin air, right?
sure. And when I think about this issue, and I think this, I come back to this a lot when I think about an issue like the gender pay gap as well, which is an issue that we probably haven't discussed yet, but I'd
Not
imagine
yet.
we will
Hmm.
do in the future if there's a big news story or something becomes relevant. Something I would like to talk about. But I specifically think that the vast majority of these traits seem to relate around children, the masculine feminine kind of like system. The traits
Hmm.
that men have and the traits that women have seem to be around the fact that women bear children. So
Oh, right, right, right. Okay.
when I think about like masculine traits, I think about sort of aggression. I think about like dominance. I think about rational, logical thought processes. And when I think about feminine traits, I guess I would think more about like openness, kindness, like generosity,
Hmm.
working as part of a group, compassion, those kind of things. And those two things, it seems pretty obvious that these both have places in society.
It's almost like the right and left, isn't it? These aren't the same, but for a society, you need a generation that teaches the young to work towards the group and be friendly and nurture. But you also need the people that are able to make other decisions, which are more removed from that the whole concept of like I guess just emotions in general, and that I get would be to severely oversimplify, yeah, exactly. If we're looking at like pre-industrial man, there were places for men and women in order for them to be successful, and those definitely align with male and female traits.
Yeah, so I've sent you a table, and I'll put it up on the screen now, that has a sort of like basic list. Now, I just found this table online, but it's like it kind of puts together. I've been researching it a little bit, and these are the sort of general traits that the websites and the research that I've been doing kind of lump them into. So I'll read out the masculine trait and I'll read out the feminine trait like straight after it, and we can see how they're sort of two sides of a different coin. So if you're
Mm,
masculine, you kind of, this table says you focus on your own needs, and if you're feminine, you're kind of compassionate and care for others. If you're masculine, you're more competitive. Feminine's more collaborative. Masculine, assertive. Feminine, receptive, grateful. And the male side seems to be about, it's more like, it's like taking action. It's like protect, goal directed, rational, independence,
mm,
monotask. And the female one is more about being receptive, nurturing, relationship directed, intuitive, interdependence, multitask, patience, and forgiveness. When I look at that, I see like tribal cavemen.
yeah.
That's what that comes across to me. That comes across to me as women bear children, therefore they need to be in a safe environment in which they have to sort of thrive. And if they're having
Mm,
children, so because women are so important and they have children, they need to be kept safe in order to have the child so that people can survive. So
mm,
it would make sense theoretically back then, especially when humanity was like struggling, that women were in the home environment and they were bearing children and they were building this nurturing sort of group activity that was the home, while you had your men
mm,
that were jumping out like, with their spears and their shields or whatever, and they were trying to like
mm,
kill animals, trying to hunt, trying to make logical decisions about how to survive, like trying to make like almost the bigger decisions
mm,
outside of that safe environment, like
mm.
becoming efficient, right? So
Yeah.
it seems like it's they complement each other.
Right, exactly. Yeah, looking at this list as well, like I definitely see exactly what you mean about how, particularly the feminine traits are just like so applicable for raising young. Like when it makes sense from a completely natural point of view. If you're to design a creature, you're going to have to design how they're going to continue generationally, and one of the ways you're going to do that is by tweaking the literal thought processes of the mothers or the people that are bearing the young to look after these kids. There's a reason that people don't just forget about their babies and like leave them in the fucking pram outside and it's like 2 hours later, shit, there's the baby. Like there's a reason that women are focused on children, and that's because they have children, right? And the same way when you talk about the masculine traits, this is, I think, yeah, like you said, this is super hunter and gatherer, isn't it? The idea of like being a competitive nature and going out, goal orientated, rational, logical thinking. That's like the idea of like hunting, or like when the tribe is faced with an issue, how does this be solved? Yeah, this is, yeah. I hadn't. I would have I would have probably associated these goals with masculine and feminine, but you're right. This is almost like tribal in a way, like animalistic. These go back. These are deeply ingrained into what it is to be a male and female, right?
Yeah, I think it's also probably very likely that these have like became less and less. They've become more subtle over the years. I bet you over like thousands and thousands of years. If you go back to like cavemen times, I bet you that men used to be really fucking masculine and women were really,
Probably.
really feminine, and they were like really good at the thing they did. But as time has like moved on, we've become less and less reliant on this system. And while women
Mm,
still bear children, they're still typically, as I said earlier, more feminine than men, and men are more masculine than women, or on average in general.
mm.
But now, as we're coming to this more modern part of society, we're now starting to see women in the workplace. We're starting to see women sort of venture out, like gaining these masculine traits. Now we're also starting to see more men that are sort of staying at home, looking after their kids, becoming better fathers. Like
Hmm.
I would imagine that men and women are probably coming closer together because we have less need to pigeonhole these people. And the only thing that's really stopping them from totally crossing over is the fact that men cannot bear children. So women still have to have some of these feminine traits inherently.
Well, I can definitely see how we're talking about a scenario in which, in the modern era, more and more women do not need these, like, traditionally feminine roles, and for men it's not as important to have these masculine roles because there's so much
Yeah.
crossover in the roles that they inhibit, the roles that they partake in society. That's fine, but what we're talking about here is like biological stuff,
Mm.
like these traits will still be exhibited in the population,
Yep.
even if the tasks aren't being like reciprocated to this entire degree. So it's like, I agree that there might not be a need in the modern day society whatsoever for men and women to have these like rigid traits. I kind of feel though, like, regardless of what society we live in, women will always be naturally inclined towards this list of traits, and
Yes.
men will always be inclined towards their list of traits.
I would agree with that. There's also an element of it though where I can see that everyone has like masculinity and femininity in them. I look at some of the
Definitely,
feminine
definitely.
traits here, for example. I quite relate to, especially the ones that talk about like emotions. I
Hmm.
think I'm quite emotionally quite feminine. Like not afraid to cry sort of thing. That's one of the things that I've like never been afraid to do. Um, not really afraid to show my emotions, and it's probably because I was maybe raised by a single mother. That might have
Mm.
something to do with it, that some of those feminine traits have been like passed on.
That would make a lot of sense, I
But
think.
it's probably important to note that men aren't just masculine and women aren't just like feminine. There's like crossover in all these departments. It just so
No,
happens that in general they tend to fall into these two categories.
yeah, that I think that's actually worth emphasizing. Just because we are talking about men as if all men are these masculine, ultra alpha
Yeah.
men, but like, no, these are just like a list of general rules that generally you can apply to one group or the other, and like even before we start thinking about people that have like different sexualities or different genders, even if you just have like straight white men, straight white women, there'll be tons and tons of crossover between both of these traits, and yeah, that's just the reality.
Yeah, it sort of brings me back to another example of how I feel sometimes people can be so progressive that they can lose sight of the original goal of why systems were in place. Because when I think about when women, well, obviously we weren't alive for it, but when women kind of migrated to the workplace, that seemed like it was an essential shift
Hmm.
because women that wanted to go out and work, they should have the right to do that. They should be able to go into any workplace and have, you know, if they're competent in that workplace, they should have equal opportunity as any man does. That seems seems obvious.
It's in society's best
I think
interest
so.
to give to give women the equal opportunities for
Exactly.
men in these type of tasks, and it's also like, before we had these before this type of equality, it was just, it was just unfair. It was just absolutely bullshit that you could have had women out there that wanted to be
Yeah.
businesswomen or fucking just wanted to run a shop, and so like these are like steps forward that society have taken that have brought they've brought men and women closer together, which is like great. As much as we're talking about the idea of there being differentiations, that does not mean whatsoever that men or women are not suitable or shouldn't be given the option to do these particular roles.
No, of course, and it obviously is a great movement. Fast
Hmm.
forward to today's society, though, and I feel like I see more and more women that if they want to be homemakers, if they want to do this sort of thing, if they want to have children, that's almost like frowned upon now. And it's kind of
Yeah.
it's progression to the point where this is where I'm talking about when liberal people start to kind of lose sight of where we came from. Where it's like I think you're probably right that these are traits that are going to be ingrained in people forever, and I'm not sure there's like any way that these two things like they can't become sort of not you can't identify these things in like men and women. They're always going to be there. Like women, I think women are always going to be more feminine, and they're always going to be
Hmm.
more inclined to do these things. And I don't necessarily think that's something that we have to like totally get rid of. Like
No.
it's not inherently a bad thing that women are good at these things and men are good at these things generally.
Yeah. But to touch on that previous point, I think though, in like the modern climate we're in, it is starting to be viewed in certain scenarios, but particularly like probably like, the ultra liberal people. A man being very masculine is considered toxic, and a woman being very feminine is considered archaic. The idea of like wanting to raise a child and nurture a family, that's considered,
It's old.
you're
That's
not.
old fashioned now. Yeah.
It's totally old fashioned, and like a man, a man being like tough and silent and broody and not crying, and that's considered like a breakdown now. That's considered a bad thing. Whereas like these are just, there's nothing wrong with men and women wanting to be masculine and feminine, and we're almost at the stage in society now where we're starting to push back overly against these instead of just accepting that it's a spectrum, and everyone will sit somewhere on it.
You can see a lot of benefits though in the overlap. I think especially we're seeing right now in men that are particular, or men who feel the pressure to be specifically masculine. We're seeing, I think today one of today's big issues is the suicide rate of like teenage boys and like young like adolescent men, and
Mm-hmm.
I think a part of that might be the pressure to be, you know, more masculine sort of thing. I think young men these days are probably feeling the pressure of society in
Uh,
general. And I
I
thought,
completely disagree with you.
do you? What do you think that issue is?
I kind of feel the opposite. I kind of feel that a lot of young men are being encouraged away from traditionally masculine roles, and I think there's some negativity placed on traditional masculine values, and now there is this
Hmm.
perception of that being toxic, and people aren't allowed to
Yeah.
maybe express that in the same way.
Okay. I think I was trying to say something along those lines, but it wasn't quite. I wasn't quite getting to it. But yeah, I see what you're saying in the sense that they're sort of being pushed away almost from that side. Yeah, because it's seen as sort of negative connotation to be that extreme.
Yeah,
Yeah, I see what you're saying there.
to bring it back to the beginning, like it's like it's like we're pigeonholing people. It's like this all started because we didn't want people to be pigeonholed. We didn't want men to have to be manly, and we didn't want women to have to be feminine. But now we're like pigeonholing in the opposite direction. It feels like so. We'll eventually we'll start talking about gender neutral kids, by the way. But we're pushing it so far to the opposite side that now like men are being pigeonholed away from masculine, and women are being pigeonholed away. Like I kind of believe that, as we said, like to reinforce it once again, everyone's completely different. But now in these days, it's very much like a social norm. It's like, oh, see if you're sad, just have a wee cry, let it out. And there's like, wait, there's huge social pressures to just like let this type of thing out and talk about it and discuss it. I think that just might be somewhat more feminine than masculine. I think a lot of guys process things by bottling it.
That
And I
was
don't.
what I was getting at when I was saying that there, because I understand, I definitely understand what you're saying about the extreme masculine being seen as a bad thing, but you
Mhm.
also like when I'm talking about the suicide rate, I was referencing the fact that I think men feel like it would be specifically masculine to like bottle these things up and like not deal with them and try and logically get
Yeah,
yourself out of it, and
yeah.
that's a negative thing to do, you know, that you would be it would be beneficial for you to inherit more feminine traits at that stage, because if you were struggling, the young men are less inclined to like say something. So that's what I meant by the pressures of masculinity. So I think
I
we're
see what you
actually
mean.
both onto something there. I think where you're saying people are being forced to be more feminine even though they might be inclined to be more masculine, and then at the same time, because they feel like they should be masculine, they're bottling those emotions up. So there might be something to both points there.
What what we're talking about just seems to be like general pigeonholing across of all genders, across of all roles. Like there are people that feel that they should not be acting the way they're acting according to their
Yeah.
gender, and it's happening at both sides of the spectrum. This is which is kind of crazy. Like it's the whole point of this movement is to try and make everyone feel included, and ironically, I think this often happens where these inclusive movements end up pushing away um, maybe more people than they might have ended up including in the first place. I don't know if that's true. That's just a kind of a feeling I'm feeling in this climate.
It might also have to do with like people are kind of pushing their boundaries these days, and we speak about that all the time. When people are pushing their boundaries and what should and shouldn't offend you, and what you can and
Mm-hmm.
can't talk about, and things like that. It's almost making its way into that era where people are like pushing their boundaries of they're pushing on you what they think you should be, and if you're something else, I can see how that might have like a negative kickback from somebody who's not doesn't feel that way.
Yeah, that actually just that brings us like right back to the start when we were talking about people's views on kids, because you mentioned like you have a lot of people talking about how they're raising their children this way, but not many people talking about why they're doing that. It almost feels like to me that it's like it's not encouraged to ask why. Like when it comes to you being progressive, that's just a universally good thing now. That is such a positive trait that should be praised as opposed to questioned, and questioning that will be seen as, I guess, authoritarian, right?
That was definitely the overall thought that I was getting when I was trying to research this topic. Like I was googling things like why are masculine and feminine traits beneficial for like boys and girls, and the articles that were coming up weren't like scientific. They weren't research articles. They were literally
It's
just
like
they were
blogs,
blogs
yeah.
about people talking about raising children gender neutral and the benefits of this, and why getting rid of masculinity and femininity was a good thing. There was no,
Mm.
I couldn't find anything on the other side. So it definitely came across as, because we're looking at these masculine and feminine traits, and I can see that there are benefits to these things. Like both masculine and feminine traits, it seems like these are both essential for life. And in
Right,
different
exactly,
areas of life,
exactly.
it seems obvious to me that one would be more successful than the other. So, for example, if you think
Right,
about nursing, it seems like the feminine traits on the list would be better for that job,
yeah,
compassionate, collaborative,
empathy.
receptive. Whereas when you think about something like engineering, it seems like the masculine traits would be better,
Orientated problem
monotask,
solving, yeah.
rational, linear, logical thinking, goal orientated. Like that seems like it seems clear, it seems pretty
Yeah,
obvious.
yeah. So I was going to say though, but actually, I'm kind of starting to understand why it would seem unfair that there are differences between men and women. It's because, like, see these traits that women have, these feminine traits. Sorry, um, these don't lead to you earning lots of money. You know,
No.
like we're talking about healthcare, and we're talking about things like being compassionate and nurture. These don't do well in terms of being a quote unquote successful person in the world that we live in. Right now, we very much base someone's success on their income, I think, and like your assets and your wealth. And unfortunately, we're looking at that list, like the ones that are masculine just do better in a competitive capitalistic environment, right?
I've got a very specific example for you that happened in my workplace actually. Now this is quite anecdotal, obviously, because it's me versus a female.
It's one off,
I say
sure.
versus, it's me and a female in my work, and we had so there was a woman at my work who started at the same time as me. We've been graduates the whole time we've been there. We got promoted to assistants recently, but during our graduate period, we had these rotations and we had periodic reviews to see how well we were doing, and they were pay reviews. So depending on how well we were doing, we got better pay rises. So
Yeah.
obviously, when it seems obvious to me, when I was going into that meeting, I had a set of 5 goals, and I was going to argue for the best possible score on every single one of them. Every time my manager said, "Oh, I think you deserve a 4 out of 5 here," I argued for a 5. Every time he said 3 out of 5, I was like, "No, it should be a 4," and I argued for each and every single one of them. Now
Yeah, assertive, competitive,
we
etc.
went out on a work night out that Friday night, and we discussed our reviews and we were speaking about them. Now they don't encourage you to do that, but we're
Of
quite close
course.
friends. It doesn't we're not,
Yeah, no, you fucking should talk about that type of thing. I hate. Anyway,
yeah,
sorry.
yeah. But so we ended up speaking about it anyway. And these goals, there are certain things that you kind of like, you talk yourself up when you talk about your goals and what you've done at your work. That
It's like an interview.
yeah,
You're bigging yourself up.
essentially. And she spoke about one of her goals, and it was one of her goals that she was particularly lagging behind on. So in fact, she'd done very little work on this specific goal, and she
Right.
basically admitted that in the interview. And then
Okay.
her boss tried to give her like a 2 out of 5, and she actually convinced him to go to 1 because she hadn't done anything for it. And I was like, what?
This is affecting your
What are you
pay.
talking
Yeah.
about? Yeah, and I'm like looking at the two of us, and I'm like, I'm no more competent than you are at my job, but that 1 may well have took your score down to the lower pay score, and you've like
Yeah.
convinced him to do that, like trying to tell her that that was like not something she would be doing, but she just thought it was fair. She was like, I haven't done any work, and you can totally see how the
That's
masculine
a
traits,
mindset
the
thing, isn't
masculine
it? Yeah.
traits would do that. Um,
Mm.
but yeah, so anyway, like to come back to it, you can see how these would be like, both of these traits are kind of essential in life, and in different areas they will sort of they will indicate success in different sort of fields, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. I think though what we're saying though is that it might not be completely fair in terms of your success with these masculine traits
Right, but
versus feminine traits.
companies definitely aren't inclined to pay you based on your
No. No.
competency.
That
They're going to pay you
no.
as little as possible.
Yeah. So that kind of seems inherently unfair
Yes,
to me.
it does.
But it is part of reality. But you're right in terms of a society, because we think about workplaces and we talk about money. not talking about that here. In terms of a functioning society, you need masculine and feminine traits to make a society that's able to achieve goals while simultaneously making a society that gels together, right?
Right.
To super simplify it.
So that was quite a good way to kind of wrap up like masculine and feminine traits. And that was quite insightful there.
Mm,
When I think about these people that are raising their kids gender neutral, I look at what they're trying to do, and it's again, it seems obvious to me that the benefits of doing so seem obvious in the sense that if your kid is going to be, if your kid is going to identify as trans or queer or gay or anything like that, this is going to make them feel less excluded at home because it seems it would make it would
sure,
not it
sure.
normalizes identifying as something that you're not seen as socially or something that you're born as or
I get that.
if yeah
Hmm.
so that if that makes sense. One of my concerns about that is maybe the world isn't quite as accepting of that yet because I've seen a lot of these interviews that I was reading talking about how their kids were experiencing things like bullying, like the classmates like weren't really like accepting of it, and it makes me wonder what other kids are going home to and they're hearing about, and then they're coming back into this like atmosphere. So what like initially right off the bat, one of my concerns is the world like isn't quite as progressive as that yet. I'm not sure that it ever will be. That seems like a bit of a
I don't know
concern.
if it ever will be because, like, we're not even talking about parents here. We're talking about kids. You can't. I don't think you can effectively educate 6-year-old kids on how to be mature about these type of issues. Like the kids just ostracized. Kids are like fucking little rats. Sometimes they're the way that they're like social dynamics are almost like purer in a way than adults because there's no like posturing, there's no pretending. If a kid thinks you're acting weird, it'll call you a fucking weirdo. And that's kind of I can definitely see that being a problem here about like the parents will definitely have like the best interests in their kid in mind, and they might think to themselves that 20 years from now they'll thank me type of thing, but they need to go to school every single day, and their teacher isn't allowed to call them he or she because the parents have phoned in and said that they're gender neutral. And like, how's that even going to work? Because like in schools, they split activities into boys and girls. They have like a boys' table and a girls' table. Like, how does that? I see many possibilities for discomfort for this child. And you're right, I can understand in some aspects how, in these admittedly infrequent cases in which a child might not be as conforming to traditionally masculine or feminine, it would make the home environment more comfortable. Would that really extend outside of the home environment? I, I,
I wonder what sort of effect it has on your child as well. To for example, if your child was a biological male and you were
mm-hmm,
to and you were to give them gender neutral pronouns and you were
mm-hmm.
to because I'm wondering if these parents actively encourage their kids to be sort of neutral in terms of masculinity and femininity, or they let their kids just do whatever it is they want to do. When they go to the supermarket, pick your toy. When you go to like a
Yeah.
clothes department and you say blue or pink, like pick your color, like not even blue or pink, green, red, all these different
Sure.
things. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if they sort of again, I would hope that they don't push these boundaries on the child, and because especially at a young age like that, surely you just have to let the kid sort of explore what's going on,
Yeah.
find out who they are. Because you're right, they probably don't understand about any
No.
like the gender that they are, like sexually, they have no clue.
No, these are concepts are just a higher level for these children.
Yeah,
Truly a higher. Like, they don't understand. They have a very simplistic understanding of life, and like, yeah, that's exactly what I thought when we started talking about this. It's like it might be good in certain scenarios, but what if you have a child that's like a little boy and he just wants to play with like fucking Power Rangers and diggers and like wants to like get a fucking sandbox and build castles, or like not doesn't give a shit about girls or pink or Barbies or anything like that. The problem I foresee with these people that are forcing gender neutrality is that I worry that like this small boy might be like, I want to buy myself some Lego, and the parents like, no, 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 that's what boys do. We'll get you X, we'll get you this male toy. Next time you'll get X female toy, and the boy's just like, I just want fucking Lego. I worry about parents enforcing this the wrong way.
yeah. I definitely didn't see much of that in the interviews. The parents that were the way they were coming across, it didn't. it didn't seem like they were sort of like pushing the boundaries on their children, which I thought was really good.
They probably would not try to do that for an interview, right?
Yeah, I guess not. I guess that you probably would try and look your best if you were getting it for something like that. Um, but I'm wondering what the impacts on your child would be if you were to,
Mm,
I guess, not allow your child to kind of thrive in the environment that it seeks to go
I
itself in.
yeah, I kind of think. No, I'm thinking back to like primary school. I think any positive impact you have on making your child, in terms of gender, feel more comfortable, I can't help but feel that the negative impacts you will have from ostracizing your child from the rest of the people around them will be much more negative. Like primary school, sure, it's there to teach you your numbers, and it's there to teach you how to read. But the primary reason for primary school, sorry, in my opinion, is to socialize you.
Sure.
It's to figure out how to get a friend group. It's to figure out how to talk about the things with your friends, and like that's just like a huge part of it. Like there's you'll know yourself, like because we went to the same primary school. There's always like a couple folk in each year that are considered the weird ones, and that's like for whatever
Kids are
reason. I
just
don't know.
mean, aye.
Yeah, exactly. The kids are just mean, and they'll find out something. Like there was a guy at, at our primary school, and he was a bit funny. He always acted a little bit weird. I think he was like really close to his mum, and he had like an English accent, and that's all it took for him from primary one till leaving high school to be the weirdo. That ruined 14 years of his life because of like just appearing somewhat of an outsider. When we're playing around with like these type of things when it comes to raising your kids, it's like you might not realize the impact you're going to have by just like making them different in one way. If the kids want to be different, you better fucking encourage that, because that's a brilliant thing to see in a child, is like non-conformity. But if you're the reason for that non-conformity, then you're going to make their life a living hell.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess I hadn't really thought about primary school in that sense, but you're right. It probably is. It's more to teach your child like social skills, and I don't know. I wonder what if there is any research on this or what the research would say. But I wonder how much a 5 year old child is like aware of gender
Mm.
identity, because at 5 years old, children they're not aware of like sexuality or anything like that. I would
No,
say they're
no.
definitely not. I think there's probably work to be done there in the sense that there is a lot of like stereotypical behavior from like parents, like have you got a girlfriend yet, to like to your son or whatever, have you got like
Sure, sure,
I
sure.
think that I can see that there is stereotypes, and I can see how that might be damaging to a child, especially when there's like no need to bring stuff like that up, because you're only forcing your child to think about it, if you know what I mean.
I agree with that. I actually don't think much of the pressures in place come from adults. I think most of the pressures that come in place come from kids. Like see at primary school, it's like, oh, you're not talking to the girls. Girls are icky, type of thing. That wasn't the parents telling their kids girls are icky. That was a bunch of like 5 to 7 year old boys saying, don't talk to the girls, type of thing. That was like just something that's like, how we're talking about masculine and feminine traits. At the end of the day, when you get a group of 30 guys, they will be exhibiting guy traits. They'll have guy interests. The same way when you have a group of 30 girls, over this large group of people, they're going to be exhibiting these traits. And I think that I don't see how I don't know exactly where I'm going with this one. I just feel that like there's a certain degree of risk in trying to limit these traits when there's a reason that they exist in the first place. I get it that you're trying to make the world more comfortable for your child if they are potentially non-binary, but the majority of kids are binary, you know, and these actions that you're trying to carry out by making your children by being more understanding with your kids and like letting them make choices has potential for stigmatization. I, I don't know. I find it kind of in my head. I find it difficult to justify potentially some of the consequences we're talking about when it comes to encouraging your children to act in certain ways. I don't know, man. It's
I can see where you're coming from. I think
oh,
I think there's middle ground to be found,
there has to be middle
like
ground.
there is in
Like,
all situations.
well, I mean, dude, see, instead of trying to raise your kid gender neutral, why don't you just like If you've got a boy, buy them a digger. If they're not interested in the digger, remember that to yourself. If when they go to the shop, they want the pink things, you let them get the pink things. Like that's when you start saying to yourself, you know what, probably my child actually might not have inclinations away from pure masculine or pure feminine traits, and that's when you start exploring these things. That seems like a middle ground.
Well,
There.
that is probably the conclusion that I'm coming to. I think moving forward, especially when I raise children, if I ever do raise a child, I
Mm-hmm.
think that what I'm going to do is I'm going to strongly de-emphasize pigeonholing gender. So from in my personal experience, like throughout and I've lived my life, I would be considered pretty much the whitest there is. I'm like male, cis, straight. It's
Privileged as fuck.
pretty much the most privilege you can get. So my personal experience is that I've never defined myself by my gender though. Like there's been no situation in my life where I've turned to myself and I've thought, I feel like a man. I'm a boy sort of thing. There's no I look back at my life and the things that I've done, I just do them because I enjoy them. There's no My gender never comes into play when I like
Sure.
make decisions, if you know what I mean. And I would want my kids to be exactly the same. So if I was to have, a child and it was a biological male, I'm not going to sit there and tell my child that it needs to wear blue or that it has to have a digger or whatever. I would rather encourage the child to like pick its own colors, to pick its own toys. So like I'm saying, if you go to the supermarket and you're buying your child a toy, just show them the toys,
Yeah.
pick something up, and no matter what they pick up, it's like, yep, you can have that. Like, let's head home now,
Mm.
sort of thing.
And in the exact same way, you wouldn't force upon them to buy pink toys because that could just be equally damaging.
Exactly.
You let the child just make this decision. At the end of the day, they're a child. They're at the stage in their life where they're learning how to talk to people. They're remembering how to develop short-term memory, how to fucking move their body. Like they're so little in miniature right now. The big decisions are another 10 years. Before the end of the decisions you need to make start mattering. It doesn't matter if like a 10-year-old flips their gender 30 times before they hit puberty or whatever. Like you go ahead and do that. Like things aren't locked in. That's fine. And it's just, see, when like we talk about a progressive, it's it doesn't quite cover it, because like modern progressive people, they say they're being progressive by enforcing a lifestyle where like truly progressive parents, they'll just be accepting of their child and as educational as they can as they go along the way. If their child has a question about wearing pink or blue, you just sit down and start talking to them about, you can do whatever you want. Like, and you'll ask them, what do they like? What toys do you like playing with? What about the boys at your school? Do you like disagree or agree with what they're saying? Like, this is, I don't know.
I
I think
definitely
that's where
think
we're
that.
heading.
Do you think that people have like inherent is the level of masculinity and femininity in people? Is that something they're born with, or is that something they develop? You think?
It's probably a bit of both, right? I think there's definitely hereditary aspects to how masculine or feminine you are, but at the same time, as soon as you start socializing in like primary school, and this is when these like deeper things start developing in your mind, like that's probably, you'll probably pick up a lot of your traits that you can be defined as masculine or feminine just by the people that you like spending your time with, and that you eventually form friends group with. It's probably a bit of both, and that's why it's so important at school, at like primary school age, to let these decisions be made on their own,
Yeah,
to avoid pigeonhole. And that seems like the very last thing we should want to do. And see, to be honest, even what you're saying, these people that are trying to have like gender neutral kids, that's their goal. They're trying not to pigeonhole. I just, not reading these articles myself, I wonder how effective the implementation of that is. But it's the right attitude they should be having, I think.
yeah. That kind of comes back to what I was saying at the beginning, where you can see how it's like a noble goal and a noble cause, but
Sure,
it's kind of
sure.
what I'm always saying about extreme libertarian, where it's like you're changing the wheel here, and without realizing it, maybe you're making the wheel a square, and it's like all of a
Right.
sudden we're vastly less efficient, and it's much worse. You know what I mean? I
Yeah,
think there's
yeah.
definitely something to be said for removing like the social forced stereotypes that are on kids, and there's something to be said from removing like the social pressures, like I mentioned, like you say to a 5-year old, if you got a girlfriend sort of thing, like that's not
Yeah, you don't
I
need
don't think
they
that's
don't fucking need to
it's not an
worry about that.
appropriate question like to be asking a
No.
5-year-old. I don't think so. I think as a parent, I would definitely want to remove those things. And if my kid was to come up to me and say, uh, why are these two men living together? I'd be like, oh, well, they love each other just like mum and dad, sort of thing. And they would
Sure,
talk about
sure.
if someone was going through a transition. You try your best to sort of explain it to a 5-year-old, where you'd be like, well, they were born this way, but they feel different inside themselves. They don't they're
Hmm.
having a bit of struggle with what's going on, so they think this is what they need to do, sort of thing.
And
Kids wouldn't
see,
give a fuck about that shit.
no, that's the thing. You could tell them like you just need to give them a pretty basic overview, and they'll just nod their head and go, like, "Got you." Like they only need to understand love, okay, and then they'll walk away from that. They don't even have the critical analysis to start questioning masculine or feminine traits, any shit like that. Like this is the stuff you can keep from them. You just need to interpret it in your actions and try to be. It's really similar to actually to be honest, the conclusion we're taking here I think is really similar to the hormone therapy in kids. It's because we're talking about there's crossover between the idea of your kid coming out as trans versus like having gendered upbringing. And it always comes down to the same. It's like you just be as understanding and welcoming and educationaling as you possibly can to this kid. And try and raise them as if at the end of the day it's not like it's gonna you're not gonna care what they end up choosing. They're going to be your kid at the end of the day, and you're going to love them respective of that. So I guess maybe that's why people do try and pigeonhole it, because they have an idea of what they want their kid to be. And when it doesn't meet those expectations, that's when things break down. So there could be something even deeper to all this about how coming down to like expectations of your children, and you should just drop those. It's because they're going to be their own person. They're not you. They're not a representative of you.
Yeah, there's
Um,
definitely something to be said for that. And when I talk about de-emphasizing gender and de-emphasizing like stereotypes and de-emphasizing sexuality and stuff like that, I
mhm,
feel like if you de-emphasize it to the point where it no longer matters in your life, when your child does grow up and if they do decide they're going to be gay or they're going to be
mhm.
trans, because it's been de-emphasized so much, it's not going to be an issue for them to then say, "Oh, well, I actually am this," because
Yeah, exactly.
it just I kind of want to try and make it a non-issue in my life, and I want to make it a non-issue in if I have any children in their lives, and I
Mm,
feel like that's just as an effective a solution as removing everything from the table, because
right, exactly.
I
Yeah.
don't I'm not sure of what the unforeseen consequences might be of just like taking the table and just brushing everything off instead
Hmm.
of just leaving everything on the table and being like, choose one. Like, none
Exactly.
of these things matter.
Hmm.
We don't care. Like, it's never going to affect anything that we think. Like, take one sort of thing.
Hmm.
And it seems like it would. I would hope anyway that it would come to the same goal as what these parents that are raising babies are trying to achieve, but it would do so in a way that is less radical and is would hopefully have less severe consequences should this be the wrong thing to do.
Mm, mm, yeah, yeah. I think as a parent, your like number one goal needs to make sure that your kid knows you've got their back. So no matter what you're doing, you're gonna be the fucking one waiting for them. It doesn't matter what they say to you and come out with. And I think you're completely right. Like just living and like, rearing this child to be understanding and give them these choices and give them these options. It just seems better than limiting options always. Like it seems always seems like what you want to be doing is giving them the choice, taking that out of your hands. And yeah, it would be I imagine like raising a child. It's like one of those things, I'm sure someone that has a child watching this will be looking at those two fucking idiots talking about things they don't understand. Like, but it's one of those ones that
What do you
you
mean?
like to
We're
believe.
experts.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Child raising experts. This is fucking. We've got this in the bag.
I read
Uh,
2 articles this week.
exactly. Yeah, you're not gonna raise a child. That'll be fine.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So that's what's been going on this week. But I think we
Mm.
it's just an interesting one. I didn't strange because it seems to be becoming more and more prevalent. I just wonder what sort of effect that's going to have going forward.
Yeah, what was so interesting about that was that how much of that conversation just ended up boiling down to the concept of masculinity versus femininity.